World Day of the Poor is celebrated on the 33rd Sunday every year since 2017. It was established by Pope Francis in his apostolic letter Misericordia et Misera, which he issued at the end of November 2016 to conclude the extraordinary Jubilee of Mercy. And so, to learn a little bit more about our preferential option for the poor, I am joined by Father Pat Cosgrove, President of Chalice. Father Pat, welcome.
Glad to be here.
So the message of Pope Francis for this year's World Day of the Poor, which is the second World Day of the Poor on November 18th, is titled, "This poor man cried and the Lord heard him." That's from Psalm 34. I have it right here and I got it wrong. Psalm 34. And if I can read, so the first paragraph says, "This poor man cried and the Lord heard him." The words of the psalmist become our own whenever we are called to encounter the different conditions of suffering and marginalization experienced by so many of our brothers and sisters whom we are accustomed to label generically as the poor. So Father Pat, what does it mean that the Lord hears the cry of the poor?
I think the first question is, where are you that you can hear it?
Right.
So the first question comes back to yourself. Where do you live? And that means proximity, I suppose, generally location. But even more so, where do you live in your heart and your soul? That in your own mind and your way of thinking, that you can actually hear it.
Right.
Pope Francis makes a great point, and he makes it in different ways throughout that document, that it's a question of accompaniment, being with.
Right.
And he says that several times, you know. You have to be in a position to hear it. And I can remember a person once saying to me, wealth is like a winter coat. It insulates you from the cold until when you see a person on the street perhaps, or another person that does not have the coat, you don't know what he feels.
Right.
You're insulated.
Right.
So you can't hear.
Right.
I'm cold, I'm freezing. And you look and say, I don't know, like Marie Antoinette served him cake. She just didn't know what it was like. That was a sincere statement.
So there is an argument. I'm always intrigued by, I don't know if you know the story, but when Pope Francis, they say that when he was elected, and that his friend, Cardinal from Brazil, leaned over and said, "Don't forget the poor," and then he kept, I was going to say pushing, but it's not pushing, but he kept reminding us that we not only need to be a church for the poor, but we need to be a poor church. And does that mean that we need to be poor? Do I need to be poor so that I'm not insulated? And I don't mean that we all have to be completely poor on the street, homeless, but there has to be a certain poverty in order that we can hear the cry of the poor.
It's a poor church who can't hear the poor. Isn't that the truth?
Yes. And
our parish, through St. Vincent de Paul, does and through the volunteers, they go out all the time. And it's all people in all sorts of different situations. And they go to their homes, they listen to their needs.
Yeah.
They hear, and then they give what's needed. And Pope Francis says that too. When Chalice began, we used to go a traditional way. We determined what we were going to give. We said, well, you know, we're going to provide education, we're going to provide uniforms.
You knew better what you weren't listening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, we'll be able to get a discount on uniforms because we'll make, it was a very good business. We changed that radically, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, I hope. To hear, you have to go into their homes. You have to be with. You have to accompaniment.
Yes.
Make that accompaniment. You have to accompany the person. And he said that himself, Pope Francis. we tend to look away, hide our face. And the prayer, of course, the psalm, Lord, don't hide your face. Don't look away, that I can't see you. I can't see your face. And we hide our face so that the poor can't see us, because if they can see us, they might ask us for something.
Yes, yes.
So we hide.
Yes.
And so we keep ourselves insulated. The more directly to your point is, how do you become one with the poor a little bit? Does that mean that you're going to go out and live on the streets? I suppose the Franciscans might say,
maybe
yes, get
people,
out there.
yes.
That's where you got to live. Go down there and but there's many different kinds of poverty. Many kinds of poverty. And what's a shame is sometimes we not only hide our face from the poor out there, but we are ashamed of our own poverty. So we hide our face from our own poverty. We deny it. We pretend otherwise. But the truth is, we are all poor. That's the radical truth.
Yeah.
And if we can actually admit that and say, I am poor, and therefore I am in need of someone, then the poor person who's begging is not a stranger. He's just like me.
Brother.
Exactly. He's begging for his need.
Yeah.
But someday, and as I get older, and I'm with people in the parish that are sick in the hospitals, they're also, and people come in, they have their marriage breakdowns, they have their personal sorrows, they lose their job, all sorts of different circumstances, that failures of different kinds, even kids in school. Knows what it's like to be poor, knows what it's like to feel pain and hurt. And what do you need when you feel pain? You need somebody to sit down beside you. You don't need them to fix it for you. They can't. Oftentimes what caused you pain has already happened. There's nothing you could do.
Right.
Except will you sit down beside me and just let me tell you. Just let me tell you. And you'll listen. And you say, well, you might have even a suggestion. Well, you know, we could do something about that maybe. Or maybe not.
Maybe not. We just be
But
with.
that's
being
exactly.
with.
So when you have what insulates us is that it's our blindness to ourselves, because we don't want to be poor and we don't want to be dependent.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, certainly before God, we are poor beggars. You mentioned a little bit about that change that went on in Chalice. When Chalice began, you actually literally had a different name. It was called Christian Child International. You changed it to Chalice. Was that around, does that change of name reflect the change in maybe approach or mission or attitude?
Some things happen because it's practical. Some things happen because your first attempt is rarely the best.
Right.
So that was our first attempt at a name, and it was Christian Child Care, and then we added International.
Right.
Because there's already a Christian Child Care existing, and our name became confused with theirs. So we added International to make the difference. It was a bad name. Nobody could remember it. And you always were confused with there's other Christian.
Right. Child sponsorship
That's right,
programs.
exactly. Yeah. So we went off in a search and said, what's a better name? What's better for us? And the one thing we knew about what I knew at least, and we did, was that we're Catholic. People say, how did it get started? I was watching a World Vision. Can I say that? I guess.
Yes.
Wonderful. I don't say anything, you know, they're great. And I was phoned up to sponsor another child, and I got angry, and I thought, why am I not being able to sponsor a child in my own Catholic church?
Right.
Don't we care? So that began the journey towards becoming what we are, and we wanted to be Catholic. And what is the most Catholic symbol to me that expresses everything that we are as a Catholic is in the Holy Communion. Everything is expressed in that. It's the sharing of the body and blood of Christ. It's the life of Christ that we share. It's all about,
Yeah, no, and I keep thinking of the chalice that overflows, the cup overflowing.
Exactly,
Psalm 116.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the giving of stuff. So that's where we changed the name, and we thought that's what we want to do. Because
Right.
there's a whole idea of sacrifice in that too. I pour out my blood for you. So
There's that suffering with as well.
Exactly.
You also were mentioning about the being with, the listening, and I guess you sort of answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Does that mean that we don't necessarily have to fix their poverty?
Well, at Chalice, we don't. I'd love to be able to say, well, you'll sponsor a child and the child won't be poor anymore. It's not enough.
No.
Poverty is way too big. We can't, and we don't take the families out of poverty. It's as simple as that. It's a bigger issue. So if you can't change a person's situation and radically, because in the countries we work, it's way beyond even the individual or the family. It's in the community. It's in the country.
Yeah.
So what then? Do you walk away saying, well,
Can't do anything. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, then it becomes how. And at first you say, well, we'll take, and I did, I said, well, we'll take care of their immediate needs. Let's just be very practical. Let's just be practical, and we'll see and we'll provide their basic human needs, clothing, shelter, food. And that's important, still is. But I had an experience years ago now that made me look at it in a broader context, and it was with Sister Marilyn von Zubin. For reasons I was there because she wasn't following the program.
Yeah.
We know better,
Yeah.
And what she was doing was different. She was actually giving money to the families. And again, as you hear, it's like giving money to the person on the street. You can't do that. They'll just waste it. They'll get drugged and
Yes.
drunk and whatever.
Yeah.
But you're not doing them. You may even doing them more harm.
Yeah.
So I went over there and we had a serious conversation. What are you doing? The argument was, how can you know that? She'd look and say, you know better than their mothers. And I said, well, it's not that I know better, but I mean, how can you know? So anyway, she took us on a journey. She knew all the families. No matter what house I went to, I said, okay, I have a name here. Okay. And right off the top of her head, she'd say, oh, that's so-and-so, and she has 3 children, and blah, blah.
Amazing.
How do you know that, sister? How do you know that? Well, we form groups.
Yeah.
And in the groups, we share our stories. And we decide what to do with the money and who needs it most, and what do we need together. So they make the decisions. So when I was leaving, she said, so, are you going to shut us down? Because that's what I was there to do.
Right.
And I said, no, sister, what I'm going to do is take this model around the world.
I'm going to steal your model.
Exactly, I'm a thief.
That's wonderful.
And that's what we do, and that's how we do it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So at the end of the message for World Day of the Poor, Pope Francis writes that he invites his brother bishops, priests, and especially deacons to do this work, to experience this World Day as a privileged moment of new evangelization. I would extend that to everyone, that we're all called to that. So how would you encourage our viewers to participate in that listening to the poor, and specifically through the work of Chalice? How can they help you?
Well, I can invite you to be a speaker for Chalice.
I'd love to do that.
Just kidding. I think the poor is all around us, first off. So we are where we are, but I first want to say we're called to where we are. Bloom where you're planted. God, you know your strengths. You know who you are. I hope you are, know what you, and if you work out, if you know your weaknesses and say, then you know somebody's suffering. Again and again, I've seen it over countless times, we all have. You're fine until you get cancer, and then you're cured of cancer, and then all of a sudden you're out there running for cancer.
Yeah.
Why? Because now you know your poverty. I am.
Yeah, you're not
exactly
immune anymore.
And so you respond out of your weakness. St. Paul was absolutely right. It's not your strengths that makes you move forward. It makes you a better. It's our weaknesses. It's our poverty. That's what makes us a better person. And never, never, ever turn away from that. It's just a gift. It can be a gift in the life. So there's lots of poverty in the hospitals. If your parish visits hospitals, do that. I was a chaplain for years in the prison system. They need people, you know. Of course, if you're thinking globally, if you're thinking around the world, Chalice, we don't do things. We do that. We build wells, we build homes, we do emergency, we do all sorts of things. But most of all, we accompany. And the greatest thing that we want to do, if it's a thing at all, is walk with. Just to say that you're not, St. Francis says the isolation of poverty. See, it's the isolation of pushing a person aside, not inviting them in. Well, you're inviting in a family, a child. Yeah. And if you want to do that, come to Chalice. We'll be glad to do it for you. And we'd love to do that for you.
Absolutely. So walking with, maybe you can walk with Chalice as you get in touch with your own poverty so that we can reach out to others who are poor. Father Pat Cosgrove, thank you so much for dropping by. I hope you can come more often.
I'd love to come back.
Maybe I need to go out to Halifax and spend some time with you as well.
We'd welcome you. We'll accompany you around the city and show you around.
I would love that. Thank you very much. If you want to find out more about the work of Chalice, it's very easy. Chalice.ca. All the information is there. Thank you to Father Pat Cosgrove, and thank you for spending some time with us today, learning a little bit more about World Day of the Poor.